Imagine you're a college athlete. It's 8 a.m. and it's your first day of classes. You've already been up for 2 hours because you had morning lift in the weight room, and you've got a full schedule of classes, so a little bit of time to eat and then study, extra training in the afternoon, and then your evening is largely compiled of preparing for the next day and rehabbing your body and studying and trying to find that perfect balance between sleep and study, which there isn't one. Now let's add another layer of complexity to that. You've only been in the United States for 2 weeks for the preseason, and before that you had never stepped foot in this country before. This is a reality that faces freshmen who come into American colleges from other countries to play the sport that they love. For me, this started back in 2014 when I was a senior in high school, and that journey then took me all around the US and to right here, right now. The journey typically starts when they're a high school student as the recruiting process that all American students go through as well, but with the added complexity of you can't go visit the college. You can speak to the coach over a Skype call when you figure out the time zones and hope that they're available. And you just have to hope and pray that you find the right college and that it's in your price range and that it all fits for you. Most international college athletes who come over to the US, they'll either find that it works for them within the first 6 to 8 weeks or it doesn't. Typically, it's that big transition at the early start of coming over to the other side of the world to play the sport and compete and educate yourself that makes the decision for them. But before that, they have to go through that whole recruiting process and then the added complexities that once they've picked the school, they have to figure out what's going on with their visa, going to the American consulate, which may be in another city, and you have to figure out how to travel there. Thankfully, dorms are available, and that takes care of housing, and usually, but then how are you going to pay for school? International students are not able to get loans, so they have to figure out with their own funds and scholarships and how that's all going to work out together. So once they get over, it's that big transition and the research, the recruiting is all done. Then they have to figure out if this is for them. That 6 to 8 weeks is crucial, typically. And from there, it's off to the races. Well, not quite. Then there's all the challenges that come with being in a new country. And after that honeymoon phase ends, like dealing with a new food, possibly a language barrier, and other challenges that come with that. For me, I thankfully didn't have to deal with a language barrier, but I did have to deal with a couple issues with Australian slang versus American slang. For one, I can promise you that a thong means something very different in Australia than it does to the US. And then you're off to the races of going through the typical life of a college athlete, but always thinking about like, what if this doesn't work out, and then how am I going to deal with this at the very end of all of it? So for me, the process took almost a year from deciding that this was something that I wanted to achieve, to come over to the US, to actually boarding the flight to go to, eventually, Iowa. Yes, great choice. So that took a year of deciding whether I wanted to do this, speaking to coaches, finally deciding on a college, and then figuring out the visas, and then finally boarding the flight, dealing with preseason, and then getting into classes. So from there, it was a challenge of deciding whether this was what I wanted to do. I spoke with the person who helped me through this journey, named Chris, who had worked with hundreds of Australian athletes to take them over to the US. And he found that if they survive that first 8 weeks, then they're off to the races. The ones that fail later down the road and decide that it isn't for them are very much outliers. So from there, it's what do you want to do at the end of it all as well? Because you finish your degree, you finish your athletic career, and you decide that maybe this, what am I going to do next? Am I going to try to pursue a visa and stay in the US, or am I going to go back home and start again and try to figure out how that is going to work with not seeing some people for years, and do I still have those relationships, and do I want to start my life over again, or am I going to keep going down this road of like added challenges of going for a visa? For me, that's still a process that's ongoing, and I'm still figuring it out as I go. But the process of like deciding whether I wanted to come here, and then when I finally made that big transition over, it was not off to the races quite. We still had to wait a little bit. For me, like when I left home, 2 members of my family immediately went into poor health, and I had to decide whether I still wanted to chase this or if I wanted to go back and deal with that. I decided that I wanted to keep going after this dream and keep moving forward with what I wanted to do. And that's the tough choices that international college athletes have to make, of leaving family and everything you've known and then coming over to the US to pursue a dream, and if that's worth it for them. Well, largely that actually is rather perfect because it does tie into my last point for today is you've got to keep doing things that push you a little further and not just a little bit further and out of your comfort zone. You have to go all the way into the deep end because that's when you figure out how to swim and you figure out what you want. Thank you.